Reading this morning from Canto 1, Chapter 4. I hope it's verse number 25. Yes? Yes? Oh, very good. A well-known verse at that. Shri Shudra Dvija Bandhu Nam Trayina Shruti Gochara Karma Shreyasi Mudhanam Shreya Evam Bhavad Iha Iti Bharatam Akhyanam Kripaya Munina Kritam. Shyamasundar? Anyone else? Trayina Shruti Gochara Karma Shreyasi Mudhanam Shreya Evam Bhaved Iha Iti Bharatam Akhyanam Kripaya Munina Kritam. Radha Krishna, will you? Shri Shuddha Dvija Bandhu Nam Trayina Shruti Gochara Karma Shreyasi Mudhanam Shreya Evam Bhaved Iha Bharatam Akhyanam Kripaya. Ladies, please. Sri Sudra Dvija Bandhunam Trayina Shruti Gochara Karma Shreyasi Mudhanam Shreya Evam Bhaved Iha Iti Bharatam Akhyanam Kripaya Munina Kritam. Sri Shudra Dvija Bandhunam Trayina Shruti Gochara Karma Shreyasi Mudhanam Iti Bharatam Akhyanam. Stri, the women class. Shudra, the laboring class. Dvija Bandhunam, of the friends of the twice-born. Trayi, three. Na, not. Shruti Gochara, for understanding. Karma, in activities. Shreyasi, in welfare. Mudhanam, of the fools. Shreyaha, supreme benefit. Evam, thus. Bhavet, achieved. Iha, by this. Iti, thus thinking. Bharatam, the great Mahabharata. Akhyanam, historical facts. Kripaya, out of great mercy. Munina, by the Muni. Kritam, is completed. Translation. Out of compassion, the great sage thought it wise that this would enable men to achieve the ultimate goal of life. Thus he compiled the great historical narration called Mahabharata for women laborers and friends of the twice-born, purport by Srila Prabhupada. The friends of the twice-born families are those who are born in the families of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, or the spiritually cultured families, but who themselves are not equal to their forefathers. Such descendants are not recognized as such for want of purificatory achievements. The purificatory activities begin even before the birth of a child, and the seed-giving reformatory process is called Garbhadhana Samskara. One who has not undergone such Garbhadhana Samskara or spiritual family planning is not accepted as being of an actual twice-born family. The Garbhadhana Samskara is followed by other purificatory process, one of which is the sacred thread ceremony, out of which the sacred thread ceremony is one. This is performed at the time of spiritual initiation. After this particular samskara, one is rightly called twice-born. One birth is calculated during the seed-giving samskara, and the second birth is calculated at the time of spiritual initiation. One who has been able to undergo such important samskaras, plural, can be called a bona fide twice-born. Paragraph. If the father and mother do not undertake the process of spiritual family planning and simply beget children out of passion only, their children are called Dvijabandhus. These Dvijabandhus are certainly not as intelligent as the children of regular twice-born families. The Dvijabandhus are classified with the Shudras and the women class, who are by nature less intelligent. The Shudras and the women class do not have to undergo any samskara save and except the ceremony of marriage. Paragraph. The less intelligent class of men, namely women, Shudras, and unqualified sons of the higher castes, are devoid of necessary qualifications to understand the purpose of the transcendental Vedas. For them, the Mahabharata was prepared. The purpose of the Mahabharata is to administer the purpose of the Vedas, and therefore, within this Mahabharata, the summary Veda of Bhagavad Gita is placed. The less intelligent are more interested in stories than in philosophy, and therefore the philosophy of the Vedas in the form of Bhagavad Gita is spoken by the Lord, Sri Krishna. Vyasadeva and Lord Krishna are both on the transcendental plane, and therefore they collaborated in doing good to the fallen souls of this age. The Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all Vedic knowledge. It is the first book of spiritual values, as the Upanishads are. The Vedanta philosophy is the subject matter for study by the spiritual graduates. Only the postgraduate spiritual student can enter the spiritual or devotional service of the Lord. It is a great science, and the great professor is the Lord himself in the form of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and persons who are empowered by him can initiate others in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Vyasadeva. In this section, the appearance of Sri Narada is the chapter title. And Vyasadeva is the person that's being spoken of in these verses. So Vyasa, a little bit about the text, the context is Vyasadeva has powers that ordinary persons don't have. One of those powers is he can know things perfectly. Who can know things perfectly? A perfect person can know things perfectly, and other than a perfect person, apurusheya, not with the four defects of a human being, but beyond the four defects of a human being, such as an infallible source of knowledge. Now, Vyas, being such a person, had an addition to knowing past, present, knowing things perfectly. He could see the future, he could see the past, therefore the histories were not difficult for him because he could actually see it. And perfectly present, just like his ability to empower a disciple to be able to narrate to Dhritarashtra. Sanjaya was able to, he is a disciple of Vyas. He could, through transcendental television, he could know what was going on in the battlefield even though he wasn't on the battlefield, and give a live broadcast to Dhritarashtra. He is a perfect knower of present, and he's a perfect knower of the future. He looked into the future, saw Kali Yuga is coming, and the symptoms of Kali Yuga are what they are, and he felt compassion. No, when you feel compassion, what do? You do something that's going to mitigate the difficulty of the person who you're feeling compassion for. And he wasn't just on the bodily platform, he was on the spiritual platform, and therefore, knowing that, just as is described in Bhagavad Gita, at the beginning of creation, there was creation, but there was also this process of sacrifice by which living entities that were cast into the material creation could become relieved from being implicated by a process of sacrifice, Jagyavai Vishnu. And those sacrifices and everything else was manifest simultaneously with the creation. Now they were manifest through Lord Brahma, but they were manifest simultaneous with creation as a means of mitigating the miseries of material existence. The sequence is very easy to understand. 1, 2, 3. 1. Creation is there for two reasons. People want to enjoy independently. So here it is. Give it a go. But it's not possible to enjoy independently. So it's not like, ha, ha, ha. But it's, it's something you wanted. And when the light comes on that says, I'm not enjoying, here's the Vedas. For those that are atheistic and want to enjoy independently, there's the material world without restriction. And then there's some kind of cultured or civilized form where people accept some restriction. Had a nice discussion at UT Austin on this topic with one grad student that's also a teacher in some field, and he's working on his PhD in another field. And he wasn't a Hare Krishna devotee, but he had deeply thought about not being unregulated, meaning basically not being an animal, because animals don't have restrictions. And some persons live their life like that, and some persons live with some restriction. But then where do you draw the line, and what's to be restricted, what's to be... So that was part of our discussion. And he was using this word temperance. Supposing you're not a perfect soul yet. So then you regulate with temperance your senses engaging with sense objects for the purpose of enjoyment, like, eating and sleeping and mating and defending, with Vedic codes. So the Vedic codes are there to regulate, and that's karma kanda, to regulate and offer the activity and the result, just like the Govardhan Puja. It's not that Nanda Maharaj was a karma yogi, and he was just offering a sacrifice to Indra because he was a follower of the Vedas, and that's what you're supposed to do if you're a follower of the Vedas. In any case, it may look like that, and some people do like that. They just follow the Vedas because that's what you're supposed to do. And by gradually, one may come to understand, there's a good chance one will come to understand, you know what, this process of even regulated sense gratification, it doesn't bring happiness, then one's qualification for knowledge, to reach for transcendence by detachment through knowledge. So there's the enjoyment through fruitive activities regulated by the codes of the Vedas, detachment from fruitive activities by the philosophical portion of the Vedas. So the attainment of one, the attainment of the next. And it may, by step by step, bring one. So if Vyas understood all this age of Kali, people are not going to be able to understand the Vedas, that which is the means of relieving them of their material existence now that they're in it. So he wanted to do something. The compassionate person wants to do something for those that he knows are going to suffer and are suffering. So in his case, being a literary person, he did a literary thing. He took the Vedas, and as the previous verse describes, he made them more accessible to the Kali Yuga people. One of the things, this simple thing, taking the one Veda, dividing it to 4 Vedas. And then next, it doesn't mention compiling Vedanta Sutra. Next is this verse. He's going to compile, and did compile, the Mahabharata. And the audience for the Mahabharata was the less intelligent people amongst the Kali Yuga people. The Kali Yuga people aren't able to understand the Vedas, generally speaking, and so they divided them, and then to make it even more approachable, the Mahabharata. Sri Sudra Dvijabandhunam. A little sharing. I can't remember where it was. It was in India somewhere, and I was attending a university program, and there was a group of South Indian Brahmanas in attending the class, and apparently they had a discussion before I got there, because one asked the question, but they're all like leaning into the question. The question was, why is it that you Hare Krishna people say that everyone is born Shudra? Why do you say that? What's the scriptural evidence for your saying that? And they didn't know what I was going to say, but what I said was, what's right here? Because those in this age of Kali that are in Brahmana families, they don't engage. Without a Brahmana cannot be a Brahmana without engaging in sanskaras. A Brahmana must engage in sanskaras, and the very first one they don't do. They looked at each other, they nodded their head, and that was the end of the discussion. I was really surprised. I mean, to this day, I remember. I don't have a good memory, but I remember that one. Because it's true. A Brahmana, say it again, a Brahmana must perform sanskaras. They must. And sanskara number one is skipped, generally speaking. Now, in ISKCON, we have a very simple, but in the ritualistic sanskaras, like Upanayana, it's a big celebration, it's a big function with brahmanas chanting and this and that. So if before conception, husband and wife have this public function, people are invited, and it's a big festival with brahmanas chanting mantras, etc., for the purpose of the sanskara. That's Vedic culture. And in this age of Kali, it's generally speaking neglected, and therefore, generally speaking, Kalo Shudra Sambhavan, regardless of parentage or ancestry. So that's this Dvijabandhu term. Then comes this whole long explanation. I won't go into it because it's too long. Is it possible someone that's born in these lower statuses, swapacha, a dog-eater family or some outcast family or some low-class family by birth, they can become Brahmana in this lifetime? But what about the Dvijabandhus aren't Brahmanas, so how can sinful persons become Brahmanas? And it's by proper sanskara and by this commitment to follow sinless life, starting with or resting upon minimally these 4 regular principles. So we have an additional procedure, the Hare Krishna mantra Diksha. And then Gayatri Diksha, in Vedic culture, Upanayana, this is mentioned in the purport, it receives Gayatri. They don't have a Harinam initiation, it's just Gayatri. But Gayatri is given to a qualified person. So there's some preliminary necessities for receiving Gayatri in Vedic culture. But one can receive Gayatri, even in Vedic culture, even if not born in a Brahmana family or without having undergone Garbhadang Sanskar, one can become a qualified person. One can be given, we can be accepted as a disciple. Satyakama Jabala, you all know the story. He wanted to become Gautama's disciple, and Gautama said, very good. What Gotra? What's your family? He said, I don't know. He said, go ask your mother. She'll know. He went and asked his mother. I don't know. I've been with so many men. I don't know who your father is. I can't say what your Gotra is. So he went back and told Gautama, I don't know. My mother doesn't know either because da-da-da-da-da. Very well. I'll accept you as the student. not dependent upon birth, although there was some question about what family you're from. So birth it's not a 0, but it's not a 10 either. The quality is truthfulness. So one who has the quality of truthfulness and other qualities, it's a sign of something. So back to the verse and purport here in Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva was compassionate, and he knew the circumstance of the age of Kali, and therefore, in addition to the previous verse, compiling and dividing the Vedas in language that made it, in ways also that made it easier for less intelligent people to understand, to make even less intelligent amongst the less intelligent able to understand or be able to access. Now, emphasis in the purport here goes to Bhagavad Gita, and inappropriately so, because according to Krishna's teaching in Bhagavad Gita, one who's not austere, that is, one who is not able to control their senses, can't understand Bhagavad Gita. One who's not a Brahmana is not supposed to even be taught the Vedas. What to speak of understand it. So that for us it's simple. The starting point is bhakti. Bhakti means the elevator method instead of the staircase method. And Mahabharata, there's glorification and glorification and glorification of Mahabharata being and expressing an expression of the essence of the entire Vedas. The stories within Mahabharata are really complex. I mean, to get the thread of a story, it's really complex. Like coming up at the end of this month, Bhishma Panchaka. And, hear from Bhishma in Mahabharata, it's in Mahabharata, how he could be killed. And the story of Sikandi, it's like so complex. It's really complex. But there's essences of truths within the whole thing. And, the generosity of Grandfather Bhishma to explain, he didn't have to reveal, but he revealed how he could be killed. Just send Sikandi in battle against me, and he can kill me. Anyway, without all the histories within Mahabharata are really complex, and people sometimes it's puzzling that the complexity is so vast, but it's easier for some people to follow stories than to understand philosophy. Although the philosophy is the basis of the stories. But the stories help people understand the philosophy. That's the idea. No, it takes a teacher to explain how the story connects with the philosophy and how the philosophy connects with the story, and one may not get it, especially in Kali Yuga. Vyasadeva knew all that, and he compiled Mahabharata, which is, I'll say it again, it's an expression of the whole range of all the knowledge within the Vedas. That's big. In a way that's approachable to Sri Shudra Dvijabandhus. Just, the least fortunate, the most unfortunate amongst the Kali Yuga unfortunates. So reading I know people that really like reading Mahabharata. They really know the Mahabharata stories. Children like Mahabharata. They like Ramayana also. And it's complex, but it's better than Harry Potter, that's for sure, which can also be complex, and all those other complex stories that modern novels and fiction and things. Because in those there's no personality of Godhead. So one more thing I wanted to say this morning, and that is Vyasadeva is a post. Someone occupies that post. In each one of the cycle of 4 yugas there's a different Vyas. In each one of the cycle of 4 yugas, sometimes it's called the Mahayuga, in each one of the 4 yugas cycle, there's a Dwapara Yuga and there's a different person that occupies the post. Basically the function is the same. He compiles the Vedas and writes the Mahabharata and so forth. Every cycle of 4 yugas. Now the Mahabharata, there's details. Mahabharata is not, it's the narration of the Krishna and the Pandavas, and Krishna only appears once in a day of Brahma, not each cycle of the 4 yugas. So the explanation of how that works is not presented, other than he Vyasadeva, presents it again. Not necessarily this particular cycle of the 4 yugas, but makes it available, makes it accessible to people for the purpose of accessing the meaning of all the Vedas that are difficult to understand otherwise. And two other things. He is still living. There's examples that we heard about when we visited Badrinath, or were going to visit Badrinath, of Markandeya Rishi, who became benedicted with the position of being a Chiran Jiva. In many translations into English, the Chiran Jiva is translated as immortal, but there's no such thing, because everything that's born dies. Everything that takes birth must die. Everything. Buildings, people, everything. Civilizations come and go. But for the Chiran Jiva, technically, they live for the duration of the entire universe, with not just the day of Brahma, but many, 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 many days of Brahma that make up the duration of the whole universe, and they live until that conclusion of the universe, which means they live during the partial devastation. Anyway, Vyasadeva is not, he lives a long time. He's still present. In fact, that's an understanding we should have, that how is it possible that in our disciplic succession, Madhvacharya is next in line after Vyas? How are we to understand that? And the understanding is, he went there to a place that you and I cannot access, but Madhva was able to access. It's considered upper budget. We can visit, it's like not easy to get there, but one can visit Badrinath. And there's an upper Badri that Madhvacharya ascended, had the audience of Vyas, and the description of the ashram of Vyas. It's beyond the opulence of heaven. It's pretty spectacular. It's not, Badrinath is very austere. Narayana Rishi underwent austerities, and many others underwent austerities at Badrikashram or Badrinath. And Upper Badri is like a paradise. It's really amazing. The description is detailed. It sounds like Vaikuntha. It's not exactly Vaikuntha. It's not exactly heaven. It's Upper Badri. And it's everything, if fully opulent. And Vyasa is still there, and Madhvacharya went there. And here's another detail that I learned from visiting Rishikesh and Haridwar and Badrinath. Have you ever wondered, in case you haven't, I'll get you wondering, as the 4 ages go, it's like kind of like a whirlpool. It goes down and 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 down. And then there's the end of Kali Yuga. And then what happens next is Satya Yuga. How does it go from like the bottom of the barrel up to the top? How does it happen? Answer: Vyasa and the Saptarishis. It's a service they do. When Kali Yuga is finished and Kalki comes and smashes everybody, how does it go back up? Vyasa presents the knowledge of the Vedas. The Saptarishis, being appointed servants of each Manu, because each Manu has a different Vyasa, each Manu has different demigods as representatives of Lord Brahma during this particular Manu. So the Saptarishis and Vyasa, they take the circumstance of material creation, human civilization at least, and bring it right back to Satya Yuga. They make themselves available. Vyasa made himself available for people in this age of Kali to get relief from the age of Kali and become situated in transcendence, in fact. And some say yes, and some say no, and some say maybe. So he's there to bring it back when it's just everything is wiped out. It's very appropriate. Kalki just cleans the slate, and Vyasa brings it back up to Satya Yuga again, and the Saptarishis, establishing proper dharma, Sanatana dharma or Varnashram dharma, and propagation of the species and the whole thing, Prajapatis. And so Vyasa is a very important personality. A post that isn't always occupied by an incarnation is a post. He's empowered. There's a distinction. I'll just end with this. It's not in the verse and purport, but it's just part of the meditation on Vyasa. To be a Vyasa, that takes empowerment. To do anything, to walk across the floor, it takes empowerment. The power of locomotion can be taken from you, or it can be given to you. And you use it properly, and that's devotional service. So every other 999 other forms of the cycles of the 4 yugas, besides when Krishna appears, there's a Vyasa. But in this particular 28th yuga cycle of Vaivasvata Manu, he is not just an empowered jiva, he is a form of the Supreme Lord. The description is given in our texts. I'm just making a point. It's a nice point. He is a form of Krishna, not just an empowered jiva. Is he empowered? Yes, but he's a form of Krishna, performing Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa. So back to the summation of the text. He made knowledge of the Vedas available to unqualified people, or distracted people, or less intelligent people, in the form of Mahabharata, and the centerpiece of it all is Bhagavad Gita. Therefore, how important is understanding Bhagavad Gita? It's the gift of Vyasa for the people of this age of Kali. And people won't understand it if they're not basically in control of their senses. They'll do something else with Bhagavad Gita. Interpret it and misunderstand it and propagate this means that. Okay, let's see if there's some discussion.
Maharaj, Hare Krishna. This point which you made on like Vyasa taking things from Kali Yuga to Satyuga and making it appropriate, like can we relate it to changing of seasons? Like
changing of
seasons.
Seasons, yes, it's like that.
Winter comes, it's like devastation and.
But to move from winter to the next season, it has everything to do with the movements of the sun, right? Now, what's the parallel? Yes, there's a cycle of 4 seasons. There's a cycle of the 4 yugas. But when it's down at the bottom, all virtue is gone. How does it go back to virtue? There's no sun. As with the seasons, it's comparable, cyclical. Yes, movements of time are cyclical. That's the similarity.
We start with spring, which is like the.
Well, you can start with spring, but you could also start with summer. You could also start with fall. You could start with winter. I mean, just like last night, Chirag was speaking. The new year. Right? Is it the new year? Is it the fall? Or is it the spring? Or is it the summer? Or is it the winter?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, all glories to your holiness, tireless preaching seva. Maharaj, I had a question. A man is known by the company he keeps.
Speak slowly.
A man is known by the company he keeps.
A man is known by the company he keeps. Correct.
I guess that is true for women also.
Yes.
So we find in the Shastras, Bhagavad Gita, there is a verse, Striyo Vaishyas Tata Shudra. So the Striya is clubbed with Vaishya and Shudra. In this first canto we saw that the Striya is clubbed with Shudra and Dvija Bandhunam. And in 7th canto Prahlad Maharaj says...
Now what was the last part? Say it again. You slowly. I'm hard of hearing. I'm sorry.
Sorry Maharaj. In the first canto, we just saw the verse...
In the first canto?
Yeah. We just read the verse, Stri is bracketed with Shudra and Dvija Bandhus.
Yeah, this morning's verse.
Yeah. And also in the 7th canto, Prahlad Maharaj says, Stri Balanam Chame Yatha. So he combines Stri with kids, with children.
Fine. No problem.
So what do the Shastras have to say about the feminist version of women's rights and women's equality? Because we find that in all these instances, the Stris get clubbed with lower classes of men.
Well, it's right in the purport. Shall I read the purport? Less intelligent. That's not demeaning. Na 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 na. The Vedas are misogynists. Da 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 da. It's just an understanding of Vedic culture, an understanding of transcendental knowledge, that the natural position, one could say there's exceptions, and there are exceptions. One could say the natural position of energy is to assist the energetic. The natural position of woman is to assist her husband. So therefore, in Vedic culture, a woman addresses her husband as Prabhu. Is that demeaning to a woman? It's just, it's a natural position. Now some people, both men and women, in our, our modern culture, they're uncomfortable with that. They're more than uncomfortable with that. They have campaigns and so forth and so on. Anyway, it's Vedic culture. It's just less intelligent. One of the things that I heard Prabhupada say at one point, tell me where in the history have there been superlative philosophers that have stood the course of time that are from that group of living entities amongst the women class. They're all men. Now, it's not to say that you can't have an exception. It's not, blanket thing, but it's just a principle. And so, what does the less intelligent person do? They serve the more intelligent. So the Shudras and Dvijabandhus, they're meant to serve others. And Stri, they're meant to serve the more intelligent. It's not demeaning. It's just, and it's not just, that's an Indian cultural thing. It's just the way it is. So they're grouped in that way. But it's not, they have the flip side is the verse in Bhagavad Gita. Such persons can achieve perfection. Shriya Vaisatata Shudras Tepiyanti Param Gatim. Param Gatim. Just, accept my designated position naturally and follow my designated position naturally and Param Gatim. That, it's faithfulness to Krishna and not identifying with the covering, the upadhi formula and think that's who I am and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's my understanding of why those groupings are the way they are, because it's just the way they are. It's not demeaning. We don't belittle children, but children, they like to play. They like to do time-wasting things. Don't have any meaning at all. There's exceptions, but that's common. Anything else? Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, I wanted to ask, the degradation of values that happens, and we have read that is due to the effect or force of time. But my understanding is also that because we make wrong choices, and that's...
Like what?
Wrong choices, misuse of free will, and because of all those things also degradation of values happen. But then when we read in Shastras that it is due to force of time, that's how the Kali Yuga progresses.
Well, Kali Yuga progresses, but there's also free will choices. It's not, one doesn't cancel the other.
Mm-hmm.
As Kali Yuga progresses, one of the symptoms of Kali Yuga's progression, or progressing, is ignorance becomes more prominent. The mode of ignorance becomes more prominent. And thus, the mode of passion, and particularly the mode of goodness, becomes diminished. No, I'm making free will choices. At the same time, I'm influenced by the cycles of time. One doesn't cancel the other, is my point.
So Maharaj, when we are practicing devotional service, so are we trying to minimize the force of time or improving our choices?
Well, not minimize the force of time. We're aspiring to become who we really are. We're aspiring to become transcendentalists, part and parcel of the Supreme. And is the force of time present in the spiritual world when one is with Krishna? Those eternal associates of Krishna? Are they influenced by the force of time? The answer is no. So the more that one can become connected through devotion to the personality of Godhead, the force of time is diminished. We don't try to overcome the force of time. We want to become Krishna conscious. And that's so the influences of time is a subset.
Thank you, Guru.
Okay. Last question. Up here.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the wonderful class. Speaking of Mahabharata, I have heard of different versions.
Yeah.
Like Ganguly's version, and then there's Krishna Dharma's version, Prabhu's version. And I was wondering if you could talk about the differences or similarities between these versions.
Well, what you mentioned is not really differences. It's just, the translator, the time, and the language that's appropriate for that time, and Ganguly's language is Old English language. It's not wrong. It's not right either. It's just a particular way of translating Sanskrit into English. And Krishna Dharma, it's made really easy, the language is made really easy for modern people to understand. It doesn't change the message or the theme or even the details. It's just language that's more accessible than Ganguly. Now the different versions of Mahabharata, if you really get into it, there are different passages here and there, and even in different versions of Srimad Bhagavatam, where a phrase or two in one version says this, another version says that, and very, very meticulous commentators make a point. Some versions say that instead of this. So there are different versions of Mahabharata, Sanskrit, from which translations can be made into different languages like English. That's different. In principle, they're not so different. This detail, that detail, some really obscure detail may be different. Now, for some persons, detail is really important. In some persons, detail is not important, it's the essence that's important. But that's an answer to your question. Ganguly versus Krishna Dharma versus others. It's just the language they've used to translate Sanskrit into English. And it's not that Krishna Dharma is a Sanskritist per se. I don't know if he is or isn't. My understanding, he's not. He's just a good writer. There's other examples of Purna Pragya, other examples of persons that have taken the text and have written something that's readable without changing the story or the message, but just different language. Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Somebody's going to have to change that clock. Somehow.